Hey guys, it's Matt. This is a presentation on the economics of what's going on, how what is going on now certainly is part of a transition into a completely new economic world model. The old system lasted a lot longer than we thought. It has no ability to last. It's a shell game. The shell game just can't continue decade after decade after decade. There are reasons and techniques as to how they've kept the existing economic worldwide economies alive as long as they have. But it's up. It's just, that doesn't, but I don't know how I titled this, but that's not Run for the Hills, Doom and Gloom either. The system that you could say we're in now is a shell game with no legs. It has to transition to something else. But in terms of all the fear porn we've listened to over the years about they're going to close the banks and they're this and that, and they might do those sorts of steps. But I just want to point out to people, they're not dumb. Okay, they know that there's no way a shell game economic system like what we've had mostly for the last 40 to 50 years, but the basis, the foundation was never laid or poured correctly. They know that it has to be replaced, and they have very sophisticated models on how to replace it. And I don't think it would be the doom and gloom that many in this community have talked about when they replace it. Sure, in replacing it, they will also have to create a degree of fear and panic, like potentially what millions of people have talked about and just rumored about over the last 10 years, that, when it's finally up, they're going to close the banks. How many times have we heard that? Well, yeah, they might do that. They might shut the internet down for a day. They might do something very scary. But when it reemerges, a very formal-looking public official on behalf of the world banks will approach a podium, and everybody around the world will be watching, because the U.S. dollar will go down, and every currency around the world is based on the U.S. dollar, and it's all tied together. And they'll announce, here's the new way people will buy and sell and trade. The new currency, most likely related to some sort of digital currency or something that would be on your smartphone, which wouldn't be very good for me because I have a 10 or so year old flip phone. But when they announce it and they say this is what the world must use, people will be in such a panic that, of course, they'll use it. They'll use it. And there'll be a transition period, probably. I don't think it'll be your dollars at home will be completely worthless. You might have to, India was a trial run. Whatever they did to India a few years back was a mini test case for this. Have to turn your dollars in. You'll get so many Big Brother credits. I don't know what they'll call the new currency. You get so many Big Brother 1984 credits for how many dollars you had. And the world will immediately adopt it. The world will immediately use it to buy and sell and to pump gas. And so the point is, I don't think even when the economic reset comes, and it could come in the next few months, this is part of a complete transition to how we live our lives, including the economic side. What's happening now is part of a complete transition in many different ways, one of which is the economic side. But when they do it, they will have it modeled exactly on how it will go. And it will be painful, but it won't be time to run to the hills with your cardboard boxes to live out the rest of your life in your TV box up on a hill somewhere. They'll introduce a new currency at some point. Doesn't mean it'll be next week. The system can't last, whether it be in a month, 2 months, the end of this year. It just, when I used to talk about my understanding of why the economic collapse that all these doom and gloomers talked about 4 or 5 years ago, why it never comes, and I came to the conclusion that there's nothing real here. They've completely put the world economy and tied it into a supercomputer. And I'm almost certain that's what they did, even not 5 years ago, probably even 10 years ago. There's nothing real about it. There are no real elements of supply and demand. And when I said that, the doom and gloomers 5 years ago were talking about, oh, if Brexit happens, then that's it. That's the end of the world currency. That's the end of the world. Get your TV box and run for the hills. And I said, okay, now that we figured this out, that there is no real supply and demand moving world economies. It's all done via injections, cash injections, supercomputers. Then I said, as bad as it is, as big of a shell game as it is, with no solid foundation that it's laid upon, they're going to be able to keep it going longer than we think. It should have collapsed 5 or 6 years ago. Should have been gone, done. It's like that scene in the movie Jarhead where they're flying over to Gulf War One, Desert Storm, Gulf War One, and he's kind of telling a joke, pretending it's about himself. And he says, like, when I was caught stealing TVs, I was given a choice: either join the Marines or go to jail. And the funny thing of it is, if I'd gone to jail, I'd be getting out today. And he's, they're 5 hours from landing in Bagram Air Base in Iraq. Of course, just a joke that's been told many different times, but that's our situation. If they really had not injected trillions and trillions and trillions and played more funny business and put in more shell games and more instruments and all this craziness, it would have been incredibly painful. But if put on a sound footing, which I don't think the monsters that really run this world, the monsters that control the levers, are probably never ever going to be about putting an economy on a sound footing. But just assuming if that would have been done, we would be coming out of it today instead of going into it. Now, I don't want to get too conspiratorial too early on in case anybody does decide to pass this to anybody around them that hasn't studied the things that we've studied, haven't looked at the things that we've looked at. But now I have to get a little conspiratorial because this is actually what's happening. So hopefully demonstrated that the person delivering this presentation has a degree of intelligence, doesn't probably sound like somebody that's slathering feces all over themselves sitting in a bathtub. So we just can't avoid the 800-pound gorilla. We need to just dive right into it. So this virus thing that is shutting down the entire world, or they're deciding to shut down the entire world based on a virus that so far hasn't even killed 1/10 of the people that the regular flu does, but nevertheless it seems justified from their perspective, and they've convinced the masses that it's justified to destroy an entire world economy to save 1/10 or 1/3 of the lives that are normally killed every year in the regular flu. Okay? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but that's not the purpose of this presentation. This virus thing, in a way, it is the purpose of the presentation because obviously they're using the story of a virus to make major moves to the way the world runs and the way the world works. And the economic piece of the pie is a monstrous, giant part of the pie. They're using the virus to accomplish what they want to accomplish, to move society where they think it needs to be. Now, some people listening to this might be saying, well, wait, what? They waited for a nasty strain of flu and then they are going to use it? They're going to capitalize on it and put the story that should have been a minor story on steroids to basically have everybody temporarily locked down so they can do certain things, so everything can come out of this in a way or a society that reflects more of what they want society to be. Yeah, that's basically what's happening. There's no reason to understand exactly the tactics. All we need to understand is, for some reason, some people are getting sick. Is it as bad as they say? They'll tell you on the news it's a 10 out of 10. No, it's probably a 4 out of 10. They're using the story of a virus, of a sickness going around the world to implement a lot of things that they think need to be permanently implemented on society. They're using the story of a virus. Are people getting sick and going to the hospital for whatever reason? Yeah. But the way they're painting the picture, that it's so dire, that's so horrible, we need to self-quarantine and stay in our homes and shut cities down, it's just not commensurate with what anybody's observing. It's not commensurate with the nastiest flu strains we've seen since 1918, which did kill a lot of people. So it gives itself away because anybody at this point can realize that the measures that they're putting in place is destroying the world economy, destroying it, the measures that have been putting in place. Now, we'll circle around and see it has to be destroyed because there's nothing left. It's on life support anyway. But the people that live down your block don't realize that. The only thing you could get them to realize is, see, the measures are much, much, much worse on a population of around 7 billion people than any virus could ever be. So it gives itself away that this is not just simply about protecting people and protecting health. I mean, when anybody that can't quite realize this, and they don't quite realize this, the people I've talked to, they think, well, Matt, if just one life is saved, then everybody has to do their part. It doesn't make any sense because when we emerge from this with 500 million around the world unemployed, that will lead, whether it be because they can't pay their rent, whether it be because of stress, whether it be because they can't eat or put food on the table, or they can't put quality food on the table. It's just Wendy's and McDonald's every day. See, that will lead to millions or tens of millions of deaths. It might not come in 4 or 5 days, like a pathogen may bring, but it will come in 4 or 5 years. So millions of death is what they've decided to do here to save roughly 150,000 people. It doesn't make sense. Even the Star Trek movies, taught us the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. So somebody might be asking or thinking, well, this presentation doesn't really make a lot of sense because if there was no life left in the worldwide economic system, why don't they just come out and say to the people, there's no life in it. We have to implement a new world system in order for the world economy to go on. What this person making this presentation is suggesting that they have to hide behind the cover of some sort of virus and they're going to do things in the shadows while everybody's scared of a pathogen or scared of getting sick. Yes. Okay. I'm not even suggesting it. I'm in a very arrogant sense, and I'm sorry to put it this way. I'm telling you what's happening. Okay. This is not some weird theory. It should be obvious what's happening. But in terms of why they can't come out and just say the world global financial system or whatever has failed and we need to replace it with a new world system, there's a lot of reasons they're not going to do that. They don't do business like that, first off. Second off, it would be admitting that the whole system that they praised and told you how wonderful it was from birth through multi-generations, capitalism, Adam Smith, and everything else, it failed. It failed. So, not that then every communist in the world would rise up and say it failed, So there's a lot of reasons they're not going to just come out and announce that the system is so sick it needs to be replaced. Because one other main reason is it's this whole exercise using the virus is not just about the economy. Remember the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." No, it's not. In this case, it's not. They want to move or intend to move an entire worldwide society into a certain place. They've been trying to move it and nudge it along for a very long time. It's like turning the Titanic. It just doesn't happen overnight. And in terms of all the other things that those in control here who pull the levers, who push the buttons, in terms of what they want to do to society in general, it's not the purpose of this presentation. This presentation is about the economy and the fact that whatever we have now is unsustainable. So, we could talk about that some other time, but I just want, for the purpose of this presentation, to note that no, in order to reset the world economic system, they didn't have to wait and hide behind a virus. This virus there's 5 or 6 or 7 major goals And they all have to do with how they want to move society down the track. And the economy is just one. See, of course, they need a boogeyman. They would say, of course, that everything was great. It was the greatest economy the U.S. has ever seen. We had the lowest unemployment the U.S. has ever seen. We had amazing new technology, and it was perfect. There's nothing flawed with the system. There's nothing flawed with what we, your puppet masters, gave you. See, this illness came, and who could have foreseen that? And the illness destroyed everything. It wasn't our system. It wasn't any flaw in what we gave you people. So they can't. That's the whole point of this. It's the greatest excuse in the world as to why it wasn't your fault. So what was wrong with the economy where the whole world economy has to be reset? What is wrong with the economy that we're still in right now, where it's on absolute life support and just can't last? Because as far as your friend is concerned, your friend down the road, he just leased a brand new Ford F-150 or bought a Ford F-150, and he got all the upgrade packages and 72 months financing at 0.5%, and everything's great at his household. And the house next door to him just sold for $500,000, and everything just is wonderful. Yeah, it is until it all breaks. You don't see the shell game going on behind the scenes. I mean, just to do a 5 minutes on the absolute basics as to those in power that set the system up, it was never set up on a proper foundation, never set up on a solid base of which it could last. Okay, let's just start with the absolute basics. It's not a rule or a law that a capitalist system where I make a product and my neighbor makes a product and we make a similar product so we compete, there's not a law that system has to be based on debt and nothing but debt. The way they design this thing, no money can come into the system without debt. Let me repeat that. If a new dollar pops up in the economy, and obviously economies grow over time, the amount of money in circulation today is much more than it was in 1950 or in 1850. So the money supply grows, and in general, wealth has grown, but you can't bring a dollar into existence without it attached to a debt instrument. This is rule number one. So in order for a dollar to come into existence, somebody somewhere had to go into debt, had to buy a Ford F-150, or a government had to float bonds. See, if you're operating on that system as your cornerstone, do you know how sick that is? That there has to be, see, that's why every time a politician has ever talked about the national debt and how irresponsible the national debt is and how we have to get rid of the national debt and these deficits are out of control, mostly I would say they're just ignorant. They have no idea how the system works themselves. But some that do understand how the system works, like Ron Paul, for example, all that nonsense that he spewed out, that if I'm elected, I'll just cut $1 trillion off the federal budget. Well, he knows that the whole system is sustained by debt. It is just like your human body. It is literally the blood. If you get rid of debt and reduce the national debt, it just takes trillions and trillions out of the economy. It destroys it. It is the pillars that hold the economy up, debt itself. Ron Paul knows this. That's why everything he spewed is bullcrap over the last 20 years. You know, every politician that's high up, like Chuck Schumer, they know this. The low-level politicians, these idiots at the House of Representatives, just spew the same thing. The rhetoric that they don't even understand themselves. But you can have a capitalist system where you compete and you don't have to go into debt for everything. There might be debt in terms of, you might need to buy a house and get a loan, but it doesn't have to be based as such that every single dollar that's created in an economy has to be tied to a debt instrument. That is so sick. I can't, and of course that's doomed to fail, because to move an economy forward, you have to have exponentially more debt. Now, is this getting confusing for people? There's no reason for it to be. All you need to take away from this section is the whole basis of which they based the economy is sick to begin with. Sick from the very first stone laid. It wasn't quite right. It was crumbling. And then, of course, as decades and centuries go by, it's been about a century for this, quote, current system. It can't keep going because, it's just like a train, going up a hill. It needs a certain amount of horsepower to get up a certain grade with a certain load, if it's hauling coal or whatever. And once that hill becomes too steep, assuming you could supply an endless amount of power, it just becomes exponential of what's needed to push the train up the hill. So it didn't have to be this way. They designed it, and they certainly can't come out and admit that what we and our masters that we followed before us and our forefathers, what was designed was absolute toxicity that was designed to fail. They can't admit that. So it was wonderful, and it was glory days, and then a virus came, and wasn't that unfortunate because our systems were perfect. And if anybody didn't follow that piece, let's just make it real simple right here. This is absolutely mind-boggling to most people, and 99% of the population doesn't even understand this. When you go into a bank to get your mortgage, say you've been pre-approved. Oh, we're pre-approved for everything in this world. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? It was pre-approved, honey. You go into a bank and say your closing for the new house you're buying is that day, or even, just a few minutes later, it's in the same building as the bank. And the bank hands you a check for $300,000. It's what you need to take to the closing to sign over to get the keys, and you get your new house. So you ask people in the street, where did the $300,000 come from that the bank just loaned you? Everybody on the street says, oh, that's easy. From other deposits already with the bank. Nope. 90% of it came out of thin air. Maybe 10% was based on existing deposits in the bank. 90% of it came out of thin air. What does that mean? It means the bank presents you $300,000 mortgage. 90% is made up. It's money the bank did not have. It's money that the bank simply brought into existence and introduced into the economy on a keyboard, in this example, 10 minutes before your closing. The bank must have had the money. They must have had it somewhere. They got it from the Fed. It didn't exist. It did not exist in the system. If you're in front of a computer right now on any word processor, just type out 300,000, 300,000, and hit enter. Okay, well, unfortunately, you didn't just bring $300,000 into existence, but if you did that same thing in the right box on a bank website or a bank system, then you will have brought that into existence. They just made the money up. That's what happens. And then, okay, now that it's brought into existence because you just typed a few numbers and hit enter in the bank, then the ledger's set up that says, we just gave this to you. Well, what did you really do for me? I'm pre-approved, and I'm so thankful to the bank manager. I send the bank manager a box of chocolates. Thank you for approving me. They just made the money up and they gave it to me. Well, what did the bank have to do for it? Well, it's hard work. They just have to push 3000000 enter. That's how hard the bank has to work to bring that money into existence. And then once the ledger's properly set up on the bank software, which is a incredible accounts receivable, see, then you owe them back real money for the next 30 years. You owe them real money that has to come from the sweat of your labors for 30 years. The ultimate in money laundering is what this is. Then the bank person can say, print. And you hear it printing out. The cashier's check is printed out, and they hand it to you. $300,000 is now in the economy to be signed over to the person that's selling you the house. Now, that's how it works. And yes, they knew a long time ago a system that is that perverse, based on absolutely nothing, where bankers can just make money up, is not going to last. Okay, and this is we are in the bottom of the ninth right now. Doesn't mean they're going to close the banks this weekend, but this virus scare is part of ushering in the new system. Now, even with that sort of a sick system, where for every loan, the lending agency makes up the money, creates it out of nothing, and a system where a dollar can't be brought, this is a great example we just went over, can't be brought into the economy without it being attached to a debt of some kind, a mortgage, a loan. Okay, even if that sickness is part of your system, you still can do very well with that. You could still probably, with AI supercomputers and knowing how to massage everything, you probably could make that last 200 years or more. But see, what these controllers on Mount Olympus, everything is always a perversion. Everything is always a sick perversion. We make ridiculous assumptions as to what an economy has to be, like the stock market just has to exist. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's just assume it has to exist. Well, why should it even exist? It's a cancer. It's a plague, the entire stock market. But even assuming it has to exist, if they would have kept the perversion out of it, then it still may have lasted another 100 years. It was just about buying shares in a company or an interest in a company, and the old days where they would send you a stock certificate and you were supposedly part owner. If they just kept it at that, they could have probably gone another 100 years. But again, there's always a perversion. There's always, let's introduce all of these strange new financial products and collateral debt obligations and bundling up mortgages for products that can be placed on Wall Street, and things like put options and call options and derivatives on steroids, where you don't own anything, but you're making a bet with money you don't even have, a bet on a bet on a bet, and it just starts to compound, and it just starts to get exponentially more and more perverted. You know, a system is completely gone in 2008 when we heard stories that the mortgages, the toxic mortgages, were so bundled up that when people stopped making payments on the home, we heard the stories, and to some degree this was true. Nobody knew who owned what. So who goes after the guy that's not paying? Like, I had a neighbor, and I'll just tell the quick story, and this is when a system gets this, the underlying basis of a system is so rotten, this is the type of things that happen. He was right back in the day. This guy was something happened to him. He was absolutely out of his mind. He was on some sort of a pension. His wife was a nice person, his kid, but they constantly apologized for him. I knew a contractor that went in to see this guy to do something in his house, and he had to be knighted. The guy said, if you want to work in my house, bow down. I have to knight you to come on premises. I mean, completely out of his mind, and he wasn't a very nice guy either. I had to put up with that nightmare for 3 years. But this is the days of nobody had to prove any credit worthiness, just signed, got the mortgage, moved in next to me, brought in his vicious mastiffs, started to destroy the property. And he also just went right out a few weeks later, brand new Ford F-250 truck. And then whatever money he got, his mother had died, got a little bit of inheritance. He put the chrome on it. He put the spinners on it. I mean, just an absolute nightmare. Then, of course, everything starts to go bad. He's just too dumb to maintain. He has no finances. He just bought everything on credit. And then he stops making his payments. Well, who could have predicted that? Well, I guess Ford people were they were onto him first, because I guess they know where their cars are. And he says to me at one point, he says, yeah, I had to get rid of that truck. They're on to me or whatever. He says, I stripped that truck down for everything I could, and then I left it somewhere. And then he kind of realized, he said, maybe I shouldn't have told him that. I was like, I don't, just like yelling across the fence, not like I was his confidant, somebody that had to be knighted to go into his house. But yeah, I left that truck here, and I stripped it down for everything it was worth. Like, that's really great, Ford and everybody that gave away these cars with no real credit worthiness of the people buying them. These are smart business practices that are a part of a society and an economy that lasts. So same thing with the house, but it's possible because he was there for, I don't know, it seemed like he was there for 7, 8, 9 months after he stopped making all payments. I'm sure he didn't make a tax payment. I'm sure he didn't make a mortgage payment. He would come over here and he borrow $10 at a time. I'd give him $10. He actually came over to borrow water once. I mean, in a way, I felt bad for his wife and his kid. I really did. It wasn't dire straits. He had other relatives he could go to. We weren't starving over there or anything, but it was a bad situation. But I'm more indicting an economic system that will just give this guy in total $350,000 of loans when he has no ability to pay it. So, they didn't even know probably how do we, the mortgage, who really owns the house, it took months to get him out of there. So this is the situation that we're still dealing with today because they didn't fix anything in 2008. All they did was patch it with more perversion, bring in more perversion, more stimulus, more money injections, more nonsense. And it is absolutely time to pay the piper. You just can't go on with something where the absolute root of it, the basis of it, is that sick. Most people have been convinced that the stock market is just the backbone of American capitalism, and good capitalism around the world centers around a stock market. The stock market that exists in its current form is such a absolute perversion and bastardization of anything good anybody could say about capitalism. It should not have ever been allowed to exist, what we have today. It is so inherently dangerous, it's not even funny. So you convince a group of people around the world to put their collectively trillions into the stock market. And do you realize how quickly that wealth can be wiped out if anything, quote, major happens? And I mean wiped out. Not that if a market falls 10,000 points, it's not that somebody got just as rich on the other side. No, it's a destruction of wealth. The price on a share will fall and continue to fall if there's nobody bidding on the other side. Nobody wants it on the other side. It will fall down to a level to where somebody wants it, to where somebody will buy that stinking shell game. Somebody will be interested in buying that turd if it falls 90%. It's not like as it falls, somebody's getting just as rich somewhere else and is taking the wealth off somewhere else. No, it's a complete destruction of wealth. Do you see how dangerous this is? So you see how it's falling like crazy now. And what do we have now? We have in the state of Montana or Nevada, we have 5 or 7, 10 deaths. We have a nasty flu. And the stock market's being wiped out by a third. What if something really major happened? I mean, that makes this look like a walk in the park. See, all those trillions, the stock market starts falling. No one's going to step in and buy on the other side. No one's going to break the fall by bidding for any of these turds as they fall down. And for anybody screaming at this presentation, I know it's not real. Of course, I know that these stock markets have basically become just zeros and ones, all injections of made-up money from the Fed. I'll talk about that in a second. I'm just saying of how it is supposed to work. So if something major happens, well, who's going to even want to own a stock? So theoretically, in one day, the price can fall 95%. That's a destruction of wealth. Instead of people taking that wealth and saying, I'm going to build a barn behind my house and put the money into something real, or even hold some gold, or buy an antique rifle collection, hold real things that preserves wealth. A whole society's been set up to go into the stock market that theoretically, I know they inject money. I know the Fed injects trillions. I know it's a big game. I know it's not real supply against real demand, but if it were, stocks could drop 95% in one day if something major happened, because no one's going to step in and buy a stock. If 3 cities around the world blow up or whatever happens. See, but the point is, why it's so dangerous is it's not all that wealth just went off to somewhere else. It's a destruction of wealth, a loss of everything overnight. It's just gone. Everything everything they've worked for, everything they've done in their career, and they're relying on the stock market. Are you kidding me? And it's incredible, masterful brainwashing. I mean, the commercials, and for those of you that aren't old enough, I mean, in the 90s is when it was laid down. It was all of these professionals, financial advisors popped up in the 90s with the mutual funds, and we heard about the Vanguard Index 500 fund and how well it does and how mega it is, and the Fidelity Magellan fund, and everybody made their 12 to 15% a year, sometimes even 18% during the dot-com boom, and it was such a sound investment, and everybody was singing the same canary song, Canary in a Coal Mine, then okay, it's already perverted. At that level, it's already perverted because you're owning shares in a company. Well, I own part of this company, that company through my Magellan fund. You don't own jack shit. Try to drive on the lot. Try to drive up and say you own stock. Show them your shares through the Vanguard funds and see if the security guard lets you on the lot. But you're part owner. Wouldn't you have access to go on their grounds? See, you don't own shit. You're just trading against a greater fool theory. You're just saying, I attach myself to Apple at 120, and I'm going to bet a bigger fool will come along and want to buy what I attach myself to at 121. And if they do, I'll sell this junk, this fake stuff that I don't own crap, to the greater fool, and I'll continue to play this greater fool game. If any president or politician was really working on the side of the people and not for the tiny little group represented by what's on the back of the dollar bill, go pull it out and take a look at it sometime, a close look at it. What do you think all that creepy stuff is for? What do you think that really represents? Whose interests that really represents? If any politician was real, president, senator, they would have held press conference after press conference back in the early 90s when things started to get out of control, saying, people, this is inherently dangerous to put your entire life's savings wealth into a stock market because it can be wiped out very, very quickly. They would have pushed people out. They say, hey, you want to think of it as gambling, they would have said through their public service announcements, through their ad council public service account announcements. But what do they instead? They send the guy walking around with the pig head, feed the pig, feed the pig. The ad council would have said, you want to gamble over here, fine, but don't put your life savings into a greater fool system, a system that only works if a bigger fool comes along and buys your junk. They would have pushed people out of it, said make sure it's less than 10% of everything you own if you want to gamble in it. And if you're going to gamble in it, know you could lose it all overnight. How many times have you heard a politician say that at any level? Never. See, it's never. So one of two things, or actually both things are going on. It's not one of two things. Either the politicians at the lower levels are just absolute morons that just know how to say the same thing over and over again and what they think what voters want to hear without understanding any of it themselves. But the politicians at the higher levels, you call me a conspiracy theorist, it is sinister. They know exactly what's going on. They know how dangerous the stock market is, but they might not be able to purchase the 400-foot yacht if they convince you to get out of it. They need you embracing their derivatives and embracing their sick financial instruments. They need you breathing life into it and putting your money into it. So they'll never explain to you what it really is. They give themselves away if anybody would care to pay attention. But most people down your block just think this is the stock market and all its derivatives. That's the heart of what capitalism is and what it was meant to be. And it would still be working perfectly, you conspiracy theorist ass, if it wasn't for this virus. Nobody could have predicted the virus. See, it all was beautiful. It was a beautiful system until a virus came along. Well, that's kind of the point. Anything could come along at any time. You shouldn't have been in the stock market, especially if you're over age 40. Now, as I said that, I realize there's a lot of people listening to this that own stock. I'm not a financial advisor. I have no license to give financial advice, and I'm not giving it in this. But if I'm saying I better bring this, out now so people don't, take that the wrong way. When I'm going to talk about how the system is completely fake. Again, it's just the Fed injecting trillions. So if they're not quite ready to go to the new economic system, they could reinflate it to a degree. They can make up any amount of money they want on their computer. So it could be, the market could be reinflated. But I assure you, if it's reinflated, it's just because somebody's sitting at a Fed computer typing in 5,000,000,000,000,000. That's 5 trillion a day, and injecting it equally into every big stock, into every big mutual fund. They can inject 5 trillion a day and inflate it. They can inflate the Dow up to 40 or 50,000. It's that fake. But see, the hyperinflation in certain parts of the economy has already started. So if they're already injecting a ridiculous amount of money, but if they just go super ridiculous, again, if you have a keyboard that's attached to Fed printing or making up of money, you can go, 9 zeros for billion, 12 zeros for trillion, go 15 or 16 zeros. I mean, but when that happens, fine, they'll reinflate the stock market if they decide to do this. I don't know what they're going to do. If anything was real and it was just supply and demand, the Dow would go down to 2,000 or 3,000. It would go to nothing just based on this. But they might reinflate it with their funny money one more time. So I'm not telling anybody what to do or not to do here. I'm out of the SIC system because I don't want my energy attached to it. I'm out to preserve my humanity. Being in the stock market takes one's humanity. I'm not going to participate in their SIC systems. So that's a personal choice, not about making or losing money. They could inflate it up using more funny business. But I'll tell you what, if that much money is injected into the system, into the worldwide economy, then there will be no stopping the hyperinflation on basics, on necessities, on toilet paper, on the price of a bag of apples will go to $20, $30 very quickly. The price of a Ford F-150 will go to $150,000. It won't be stopped. And then at that point, nobody can afford that, whoever's giving this presentation. Well, yeah, I know that. At that point, they will have to just simply wipe everything clean and say, okay, this here is the new world currency, and this is how it's going to work, and reset and do that. I'm not saying when the one world currency might not come next week. They might try to inflate it up one last time. I don't know. I wouldn't be in it, but who knows what they're capable of? They don't have a limit on the number of zeros they can type out before they inject. So, but again, at that point, cotton swabs will be $27. So, and at that point, nobody can afford anything, and every senior, begins to starve, and the new system will then have to be pretty quickly implemented, and it will be accepted, and they know exactly how to do it. They've modeled it hundreds and hundreds of times, not just through Bernanke, monsters like Ben Bernanke, but through Greenspan. They know exactly how to introduce it, and it'll be painful, and it'll be a whole new paradigm, a reset of what is considered who has wealth and who doesn't, probably designed to put wealth into even a smaller and smaller amount of hands, but people will gladly accept it, and it'll work. You'll be able to use it to buy apples and to buy cotton swabs. It'll work. They've modeled it out, and they likely know exactly what they're doing. Purpose of this video is just the economic side. It was not the social or human side or dehumanization side or spiritual side of what they on Mount Olympus are trying to do to us. That is far too big of a topic and far too conspiratorial for this presentation. And because this could be passed to others, I kept it limited basically to pure economics. And I hope I've gotten people to want to break out of the economic, not limit themselves to say what's happening now is purely about economics, but it's about other things. And that's really what's important. And let's talk about that some other time.